Hi everybody, this is Dino Chris from Prehistoric Facts. This is a Q&A episode. If you might see me almost kind of ready to cough or something like that, I got a little bit of a head cold, so I kind of actually it's going to be a little bit tricky for me to actually do this episode, but I'm going to tough it out and actually get through this Q&A episode as quickly as possible, and so we can actually get started here. So Benjamin from Hong Kong, is Torvosaurus as big as Acrocanthosaurus? When we look at Torvosaurus and Acrocanthosaurus would probably be a tad bit larger because the weight of Acrocanthosaurus is actually about 5 to 6 tons in weight, and so that is actually a heavily duty or 4 to 6 ton dinosaur, and so it's a pretty heavy-duty type of Neo-Carcharodontosaurid or Proto-Carcharodontosaurid, and so that's where you actually have Acrocanthosaurus, more muscular built than Torvosaurus. Torvosaurus is a tad bit smaller in terms of height and weight, and so weight of Torvosaurus is pretty much going to be 3 to 4 tons, and so this is actually an animal that is probably going to be a tad bit faster than Acrocanthosaurus, but in terms of size-wise, they're nearly similar, but it's just that the Acrocanthosaurus is going to be taller and more heavily built. And then your second question, how do you tell the difference between Torvosaurus and Allosaurus? Well, Torvosaurus has got a different skull than Allosaurus. Torvosaurus has got more like a megalosaurid type of skull, and so it's probably got much more narrow jaws, and also a much more longer skull, and the teeth are actually going to be more primitive. They're going to be very thin compared to Allosaurus, and so that's how you're actually going to tell the difference between Torvosaurus and Allosaurus. Even though Torvosaurus is going to be a bit larger than Allosaurus, it's just that Allosaurus has got more distinguished claws on its hands. We haven't found Torvosaurus claws yet, but we might actually find some at some point about what kind of claws did Torvosaurus actually had. Did it have more megalosaurid claws, or did it actually have claws that are almost similar to Allosaurus? But even though it's probably going to have more megalosaurid claws, which were a tad bit more primitive compared to Allosaurus, but well, we'll have to find out if we actually find a complete Torvosaurus to see whether or not it actually compares to some similarities and some differences between the two, but mostly the skull, the size, and mainly possibly the claws are actually going to be the difference, but we haven't found Torvosaurus claws yet. Third question, how come Dromaeosaurus has a more powerful bite? Well, when we look at Dromaeosaurus, its skull is kind of actually a little bit more boxy compared to other Dromaeosaurs, because Dromaeosaurus is actually a later version of the Dromaeosaurus, and so it's still small, but if you actually look at the skull compared to other Dromaeosaurs, its bite is probably going to be a little bit more powerful. So that's why we find bite marks on some duck-billed dinosaur bones that are from Dromaeosaurs, but they didn't bite through bone. It's just that they actually just had a very distinguishable bite, so they probably had a more powerful bite than any other Dromaeosaur that has ever been found, even though Utahraptor could actually rival that, but even though it's just that when we look at Dromaeosaurus compared to the other Dromaeosaurus has a more boxy type of skull. Not as boxy as Tyrannosaurus rex's, but actually a really solid type of skull, but still very fragile dinosaur. Why did Hypsilosaurus lay big eggs? Well, first of all, when we look at Hypsilosaurus, it's actually a small sauropod, and so it's about 27 feet long. It's not going to have very big eggs compared to, like, say, Argentinosaurus or even Patagotitan or even Saltosaurus, and so its eggs are actually going to be fairly small compared to the other sauropods. So Hypsilosaurus is actually a small sauropod, so it's not going to have very large eggs. The size of Hypsilosaurus's eggs are possibly just going to be about the size of probably, say, maybe like a kid-size soccer, or probably like a kid-size basketball. So probably like about this big. So probably like close to 5 inches in circumference, and so that's, or diameter if you want to call that, and so 5 inches in diameter, and so it's probably how big the eggs will probably be. And is Protosaurus wider and heavier than Argentinosaurus? No. When we look at Argentinosaurus, its bones are larger compared to Protosaurus. Protosaurus is a tad bit smaller because we only found like bits and pieces of Protosaurus. We found more Argentinosaurus than Protosaurus. So Protosaurus is probably very rare compared to Argentinosaurus, and so Argentinosaurus is larger, heavier, and so in terms of width, pretty much Argentinosaurus is going to be a tad bit wider, and so that's why we're not going to actually see any evidence that Protosaurus is larger, even though there are some paleontologists that have come out and say that like Protosaurus could be longer than Argentinosaurus, but we haven't found any evidence to support that. And then Brendan from Morris, New York. Why did Carcharodontosaurus, Alkasaurus, Saltosaurus live together at the same time in documentary series Planet Dinosaur? I thought they lived different times. Do you think writers and directors do not pay attention to their scientific advisors? When we look at that show Planet Dinosaur, that was back in the mid-2000s, and Christian Slater actually narrated that. Now, when we look at that Alpha's Egg episode, we actually see Alkasaurus, Carcharodontosaurus, and Saltosaurus living together. Now, Alkasaurus is actually going to be more likely to live with Saltosaurus, but mainly more like Carnotaurus would actually be living alongside Saltosaurus, because Saltosaurus is actually around 85 to 75 million years ago, and so pretty much it lived around the time when Carnotaurus was around, and lived pretty much at the time when Alkasaurus was around. Now, Alkasaurus or Carnotaurus are actually abylosaurids that actually were living around near the same time. But Alkasaurus is a tad bit later. But adding Carcharodontosaurus does not make sense. Why would they actually add Carcharodontosaurus into the mix for the Saltosaurus as like the top predator? I disagree with that. I think it's just mainly more of like we need to create like a much bigger villain in this episode. That's why Discovery Channel kind of actually went for more entertainment purposes, is to add another dinosaur that is probably not from the same period in time as Saltosaurus and Alkasaurus in general. And so it's very, very difficult to actually wonder why they chose to go that route, but it's probably mainly for entertainment purposes. But they mostly, at that time, Discovery Channel did pay attention to their scientific advisors, but at that point in time, I think it's just more like they probably did not pay attention. Or otherwise, maybe there is a Carcharodontosaur that is out there. It's just hasn't been named yet, and so that could be the case. Is that maybe that there is a Carcharodontosaur that has actually been found, and it's just not been documented. So we'll find out as soon as we actually get the information out. But mainly, I think it's probably the case is that the writers and the producers probably didn't actually pay attention to the scientific advisors for that episode. All right, that's it for now. No, next week would actually be a special episode. So if you get any prehistoric animals you want me to talk about, feel free to let me know via email, dinochrist71@gmail.com, or go on my Facebook page, Prehistoric Facts and Dino Chris. Look through all the episodes. If there's new information out there from an episode I've done before, you can let me know. I could do a redux episode, or otherwise if there's a dinosaur or prehistoric animal I haven't talked about yet, feel free to let me know. And you can still send me questions about dinosaurs or any other prehistoric life by emailing me at dinochrist71@gmail.com, or go on my Facebook page, Prehistoric Facts of Dino Chris. Like the page, you can actually post your questions in the comment section on any Facebook post or on the wall. Remember, keep your questions short and to the point. You can also follow me on Twitter at CSGRALL. That's my Twitter page. I post pretty cool stuff on there. Also, take care of the people around you, and also for younger people out there, to make sure to listen to your parents, your teachers, and your guardians. It's the best motivation you can have for good education. It's very important to have a good education. So with a good education, get a good job in the future. All right, that's it for now, and I'll see you guys next week.